Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. I hope you are well. I know that most of you are probably on social media. You've got your friend and family member Freds that you talk to on Facebook or Instagram, or maybe some people on Twitter. And you always hear these arguments where people are in favor of these medicine mandates, or that you'll say that we need to prioritize freedom over safety, and they'll come back with all of these ridiculous rebuttals. I'm sure you've heard them all 1,000 times. So what I want to do is kind of have a bit of like a series here on this channel where we go through and kind of smash these arguments one by one. And they're actually very easy to destroy and dismantle because the line of thinking that is used to come to the conclusions that they're coming to are very basic, elementary. I mean, I would expect it of like a 10-year-old, but I would not expect it of an actual adult who is using critical thinking. And maybe that's the point. They're just not using any critical thinking. But I think that if you're armed with these responses, that you can hopefully open up some eyes of the people around you, at least within your social circle online. And so let's start by going over one of the most ridiculous, but one of the most often used arguments for mandates and for why we should value safety even more than freedom. And I'm not saying that safety isn't important, but we have to prioritize freedom, because at the end of the day, freedom is all we have. If you're locked up in a cage for the rest of your life, you could be very safe, but just because you are alive does not mean that you are living. There's a big difference between those two. So let's go into some statistics, and I'll kind of hopefully go down my notes here. We'll organize these thoughts so you guys can be armed with a good response to your friend and family member Freds on Facebook and others when Facebook's actually working. uh, so let's start by, okay, we'll start right here. And this is the, well, let me see if I can go to the article here. Oh, yes, I had it up. Okay, so given the rate of, well, let me highlight this. As usual, I'm wildly unprepared. It's amateur hour at the Rebel Capitalist channel, which is all my fault. Given the rate of DUI, driving under the influence of alcohol, it is remarkable the fatality rate is not greater. Alcohol-related highway crashes accounted for 13,365 deaths in 2010. I'm not sure that's a little lower or higher. I think although these aren't up-to-date statistics, this kind of goes over the concept of what I'm referring to. In addition, alcohol-related highway crashes annually cost Americans estimated $37 billion. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to dissect what this person's position is. So let's just say that you post on social media that freedom over safety. And they say, "Oh, well, that's ridiculous. Are you saying that we should not have any drinking and driving laws? So are you saying that I should be able to just down a fifth of vodka and just drive on the wrong side of the road? Well, that would be, I should be free to do that. That would be valuing freedom over safety." As though that's just a mic drop moment for them and that you would have absolutely no rebuttal to that whatsoever. So the first thing I would say to that is, well, if that's your argument, then why don't we just ban driving? Because driving would prevent even more deaths. And if you never left the house, if you never drove, then you'd never have the opportunity to kill anybody else. So then they would come back and say, "Oh, well, that's not a good example, because when you're in your car driving under the influence, the probability that you kill someone or inflict harm on someone is far greater. Okay, well, now what they've admitted to is that their argument is based on the probabilities of XYZ negative event coming to fruition. You see? So then the question becomes, okay, well, what are the probabilities that you go outside and just as a result of you going outside and being without the medicine, you guys know what I'm talking about. What is the probability that you actually cause someone to die as a result? And so we've got to look into those statistics. But that's where you kind of have to see where they're coming from first and foremost. Got it? Okay. So we're going to put that on the shelf for a moment. We're going to come back to it. And now let's start with another rebuttal that I would have is that, okay, well, what you're implying is that DUI laws, or that we should have them in the first place. Okay. And they say, well, of course we should. Well, maybe not. So let's go back to this article here. And we look at how many alcohol related highway crashes accounted for 13,000 roughly deaths in 2010. And again, this cost Americans $37 billion. Okay, we got that. But then how much did the laws themselves cost Americans? Think about the enforcement that we have, or the cost of enforcement for all of these DUIs. Think about the cost to the Americans who get these DUIs. And you could say, well, George, well, they deserve it. Oh, do they? You sure about that? 100% of them do? Because I know people in my own personal life that have received DUIs, not while driving, but just because they're in their driveway, just having a beer when they're working on the car, and the keys are in the ignition. True story. True story. I know several of my friends who have gotten DUIs when they weren't even driving. They were trying to do the right thing and they just pull over to the side of the road, still get a DUI. So does that person deserve to lose their job? Does that person deserve to go to jail for 10 days? Does that person deserve to pay, who knows how much in fines? Let's say $10,000. Does that person deserve to have that on their record? Well, I don't know. I don't know. But there is a cost to society, and there is a cost to pay all of those additional wages and give those resources to the police officers that are upholding this law, right? So then you have to ask yourself that, would the cost to enforce these laws and the cost to the Americans, many of them who get these DUI tickets or infractions, is that over $37 billion a year? Because I would argue it's way over that. When you think about the time lost at work and all the other kind of domino effects that are a result of someone getting a DUI. And let's be very, very clear. Not every single DUI results in a death, right? I mean, how many DUIs do people get that resulted in nothing happening? We go back to the example I gave of my buddy just being in his driveway, working on his car, having a beer while the keys are in the ignition, right? So what I'm not saying right here that drinking and driving should be legal. What I am saying is we need to have a proper debate about it that we have not had. We need to do a proper cost benefit analysis, which no one ever does, because we just immediately get emotional about it. So let's continue on here. However, drunk driving awareness and enforcement efforts such as zero tolerance laws may have impacted, or may be having a positive impact. You get that? May, not are, may. The percentage of alcohol-related fatalities decreased from 50% in 1990 to 42 in 2009. Okay, well, show me the trend line prior to that. Why don't they do that? You see what I'm saying? Because if the trend line is identical from 1970 to 1990, well, then we can't conclude that any increase in the law would have done anything to deter, or would not have contributed to the reduction in the overall percentages of car accident deaths that could be attributed to driving under the influence of alcohol. So they don't give us that number. But what they do give us is this chart, and you can see it goes back to 2001, 2010. Now, me being the age that I am, I remember what DUI laws used to be like in the 1980s and the 1990s. And compared to today, they were basically non-existent. They were there, but it was nothing like it is today, not even close. And the time frame in which they became very significant, let's say, was right here. It was in the late 90s all the way to call it 2010. And since that time, they've pretty much been the same. This is when all of the states were reducing the blood alcohol level from, I don't know what it was, 0.15 or whatever, all the way down to 0.8, which is basically like a person of 150 pounds having a half a beer or something like that. Really, really getting down to where you couldn't have any alcohol in your blood whatsoever, right? So look at what happened to the percentage of deaths as a result of alcohol. We go from 41.2% to 40.6 from 2001 to 2010. And this is the time frame when those laws got really, really strict. So you do see that we have had a reduction in the overall fatalities, but we've had a reduction of the fatalities not involving alcohol, meaning you could most likely could contribute to this to cars themselves becoming safer, or people just being better drivers, or us having better highways, better roads, what have you. And so this cannot be contributed to these uh, DUI laws becoming more draconian, right? So first of all, what we have to do with your friend and family member Fred is establish that just because they assume that having DUI laws are just a no-brainer, like no one could ever, ever, ever argue that we shouldn't have DUI laws. I think there's a very good argument as to why we should not have them. And I discussed this with Judge Napolitano the last time I interviewed him, or the first time and last time that I interviewed him on the George Gammon channel. And from a standpoint of the law and freedom and liberty, he argued that we should not have them. Now, is that to say that you should be free to go out there and inflict harm upon someone else? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But driving after a couple beers and actually killing someone, those are two completely separate things. And if you kill someone as a result of your actions, well, then that's something that should be illegal, according to Judge Napolitano. But just by having a few beers, driving, going from one place to another, just because it may or may not increase the probability of you having an accident, that should not be illegal. And it makes a lot of sense. And I know from an emotional standpoint, this is hard for people to really digest, especially young people, because they didn't really grow up in a time where the DUI laws were more like getting a speeding ticket. That's the era that I come from. And believe it or not, we still functioned as a society. We still functioned extremely well. But I know that's a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. But you've just got to set your emotions aside for a moment and just look at the facts and look at the principles behind not only these DUI laws, but behind what Judge Napolitano and many libertarians are saying. At the end of the debate, at the end of the day, I don't think that this is just a closed case, that we should just obviously have these laws that prevent people from driving after having a couple beers or whatever it may be. So that's rebuttal number one. Now, I know that that probably won't move the needle with your friend and family member Fred, because the fact that they're arguing for safety above freedom in and of itself shows you that they're not using any type of critical thinking. They're pretty much strictly using their emotions. So I think you'll have to default to the argument that we went over a couple minutes ago, where it's to what degree is the person who is going outside, or to what degree is the person who has chosen not to inject the foreign substance into their body, how much are they negatively impacting society, or what is the probability that they cause death? Because again, that goes back to the argument where you ask your friend, hey, okay, well then, based on having DUI laws, that in their opinion The cost benefit analysis makes a lot of sense in that it saves lives, quote unquote. Well, on that argument, we should just ban all driving because that would save a lot more lives. People were never able to leave their home or never able to leave their home using a car. Maybe they just used a bicycle or they walked or they had to jog or use public transportation. Then we could eliminate pretty much all 13,000 of those deaths that we saw occurred in 2010. But then, of course, they come back and say, oh, no, 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 you're taking it too far. It's just because the alcohol increases the probability. Okay, so we've got to that point with this person. So then what we have to do is we have to look at the probability of someone that either does or doesn't have. I mean, sometimes you don't even know that you have the cerveza sickness, but someone that doesn't have the medicine actually going out and causing danger to the degree that driving under the influence of alcohol would cause danger to those around you in society at large. Okay, so on that note, let's go over to this article from, looks like NBC News. And this is going to be a tricky one here for YouTube, but I'll do my best. So people who have the medicine are less likely to transmit the cerveza sickness, new research finds. Now, I will say here, first and foremost, that there's research on both sides here. So I'm just giving your friend and family member Fred the benefit of the doubt and using one that would kind of back up their preconceived narrative. But I think, to be clear, I think the jury's out on this one. So using cycle threshold values, and this is looks like the viral load in the individual who was infected with the cerveza sickness, regardless of whether they had the medicine or they did not have the medicine. The researchers found a similar level of viral load in the people who chose not to have the medicine and the people who did have the medicine, who were infected with the specific variant of the cerveza sickness. And this backs up a lot of prior studies. They say even so, people who were fully had the medicine were still less likely to infect others. So first of all, you start scratching your head and you're saying, well, if the viral load is the same, then how can they be less likely? And I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole, but let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that it is. Richterman, who looks like one of the doctors in this study, or that is commenting on the study, pointed to a recent preprint from China that found large reduction in transmission in those who had received two doses of the medicine compared to and you guys can see what word is right here. And remember the red flag, the smoking gun that we use to determine whether or not a scientist or a public figure or one of the useful idiots that we know as politicians, the smoking gun, the silver bullet, to determine whether or not they're trying to propagandize you, to manipulate you to believe something, or they're just being honest around the cerveza sickness, is whether or not they acknowledge natural immunity for this group of people. And you can see that once again, this study does not do that. So you got to scratch your head and say, why? Why? If we are being intellectually honest and we're trying to determine the rate of transmission with those who have received the medicine, shouldn't we also do that with those who have natural immunity, which offers very similar benefits, if not better benefits, to those who have received the medicine? But the fact that they're lumping all individuals under this category of unmedicinized just shows you that they're being intellectually dishonest. And it would lead you to believe that this article, like so many others, is more about propaganda than it is the truth. But again, let's give them the benefit of the doubt here. The new study showed that protection against transmission seemed to waver over time, however. After 3 months, people who had breakthrough infections after receiving this particular medicine were just as likely to spread cerveza sickness, the new form of it, as the unmedicinized. And there again, they're not even breaking it down by natural immunity. So you would assume that natural immunity would offer even better or fewer, less rate of transmission or a lower rate of transmission than even those who had received the medicine. See, so why are they not talking about this? But that's kind of a side note. What we want to tell your friend and family member, Fred, is that listen, just because you have the medicine does not mean that you cannot transmit the cerveza sickness. So let's go back to the DUI analogy. Just because you have the medicine doesn't mean that you haven't had 5 beers before you go driving. It just might mean that you haven't had 8 beers. So is it that much better for you to have 5 beers than 8 beers, to the point where we should make it mandatory by law that people inject that foreign substance into their body? Which, oh, by the way, if you study history, you know that giving the government that type of power and control leads to very, very bad outcomes. You see, again, we've got to consider that cost benefit analysis. So what we're really showing them is the problem in their thinking or lack thereof. And that's that we can't assume that just because we have a medicine mandate and therefore we take away people's freedom, we can't assume that we are any more safe. Now, even if we're slightly more safe, you have to ask yourself, to what degree? Because remember, it goes right back to what the person was saying initially when you asked them, okay, well, should we ban all driving? Remember, they would most likely come back with, well, we can't ban all driving. The reason we should make driving under the influence illegal is because of the increased probabilities. But you see, we don't know what the increased probabilities are. And it's very safe to conclude that there is no increase in probabilities between those who have had the cerveza sickness, therefore have natural immunity, and those who have the medicine. So what you'd be doing is you would be arguing for safety over freedom, in which case the government would have far more power and control. So you'd have that downside. But yet we don't even know, and there's a high probability that there isn't even a higher degree of safety that's offered by, which would be the benefit of that cost of giving the government exponentially more power to micromanage our lives, not only over the next month, but the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that would affect not only us, but our kids and our grandkids. See? So in summary, just to make sure that I'm very clear, I think you guys get the argument that maybe drinking and driving shouldn't even be illegal in the first place. But then, assuming that they don't go down that path, then you ask them, should driving be illegal? They say no, because they're the probabilities. And then you go into the probabilities of someone actually transmitting the cerveza sickness if they have natural immunity, compared to the probabilities of someone that has the medicine. And then you come back with saying, okay, let's do a proper cost benefit analysis. And you see very quickly that there most likely isn't much of a benefit at all, if any, but yet we still have a massive amount of costs involved with giving the government this type of power and control. And that's why it always comes back to prioritizing freedom over safety. And I think that a lot of you, if you watch this video a couple times and look at these articles I'm referencing, will be able to articulate that argument far better than I just did on a live stream. It's not easy to do. So you guys, you're armed. I'm expecting you now to leverage this information, this data, these concepts and thought processes to go out there and open up people's eyes and remind them why we should be, as a society, valuing and prioritizing freedom over safety. You guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'll see you on the next video.